All right, here we are, live at lunch for most folks, and we're doing this live, and we're trying to get this started. And welcome, and welcome. We're starting this out, and we're doing this in the way that we know how to. We're doing this in a manner that makes it happen, and I appreciate everybody who is up here and checking us out, watching what we're doing, and God bless you today. And here we go. We're doing this on chapter 11, Luke chapter 11, and verse 3. We're still doing the Lord's Prayer. We're still following along with this. For some that are on Facebook, you may not get it in the same manner that we're doing it here, but I'm definitely trying to get some things adjusted for y'all so we can get this going. You can check it out in the comments, see a lot of what we're sharing, and definitely get on board with what we're doing here. So first off, as we start this out, Luke chapter 11, verse 3, give us day by day our daily bread. This is looking at the Lord's Prayer, still looking at the Lord's Prayer. And when we talk about this is part of where Jesus is answering the request of his disciples. Lord, teach us to pray. Lord, teach us to pray. Lord, teach us how to pray. Getting into the aspects of this model prayer by Jesus. And so we're going to take this from a different approach. When we look at this, give us day by day our daily bread, what Jesus was sharing was really something that we could say cuts into Old Testament and New Testament concepts. Old Testament and New Testament concepts. It brings into play the manna from Exodus, the manna with Moses and the children of Israel in Exodus, right? It brings that into play, and that comes about in a manner that we see the manna playing a role as part of the daily bread. The manna plays a role as part of the daily bread, and it really gets into aspects of, hey, what is this man, Jesus, doing and sharing with these disciples that he's referring to daily bread, right? Our daily supply, our daily sustenance from God. And then what is he talking about as far as bread from heaven, this bread of life that we see later on in John chapter 6. We see John chapter 6 where Jesus talks about the bread of life. And that's actually John 6 verses 22 through 59. John 6, 22 through 59, where Jesus talks about being the bread of life. Jesus talks about being the bread of life, and we get a sense of what Jesus is sharing here when we talk about God, right? God being the provider. God being the provider, and God being the provider for us through daily bread. And so when we talk about God being the provider for us through daily bread, we have to begin to see what was that Old Testament concept and what was the New Testament concept that is brought together with what Jesus is talking about with our daily bread. And how does that relate to us in prayer? How does that relate to us in prayer? So let's check this out. In the Old Testament, you've got the manna, right? In the New Testament, you've got the bread of life. And so I'm going to compare both of these with each other and show and share some things that are connected to both the bread of life as well as what's um, connected to the bread of life and what's connected to the manna. What's connected to the bread of life and what's connected to the manna. And when we look at this, I'm going to share this in what can only be considered a comparative table, right? And I'll also share that table here on Facebook. Here's a link to it for the image, right? And to go along with that, I'm going to share, well, can't share the photo, but that's what that is on Facebook. So you'll see it there. Click on that and you can go from there. Everybody else, you can see it here on the screen. And God bless. Let's get into this. God's provision through the manna is to sustain the Israelites while they're in the wilderness. That's what that is. It's to provide daily bread, sustenance for them in the wilderness. And the bread of life, which Jesus speaks about in the New Testament, is the provision from God, which is for salvation for the world based upon belief in Jesus. So you've got bread provided by God just to keep the people going and alive and to begin this dependence upon him and to test whether they will follow his instruction, as he shares with Moses in Exodus 16. And then you've got the bread of life, which came down from heaven, Jesus shares in John chapter 6, which is to provide everlasting life to the world. Those are the two comparisons right there. And so look at that and look at the scriptures that talk about that. Psalm 78:24 in NASB says, he rained down manna upon them to eat. He gave them food from heaven. Talking about the manna. Jesus, when the people are grumbling, he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. John 6:41, New King James Version. Then it goes on to describe it. And in the description of the manna, it says the people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. Exodus 16:31, NIV. And the word became flesh and dwelt among us. John 1:14, New King James Version. Could I have used other versions to explain Jesus coming in the form of man and thinking it not robbery to be equal with God? Yeah, but this is just a simple explanation of here's something that was manna, what they called manna, that was like coriander seed. It was tasting like wafers made with honey. And here's the Lord, who was the Word, who was in the beginning as the Word, and the Word became flesh, as we know in John 1:14. That's the difference between the two. And the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day. So here's where Jesus in this prayer is saying, give us day by day our daily bread. That's part of the Old Testament reference to the manna, how the manna was distributed, how the manna was provided by God, how the manna was given by God to the people, right? But Jesus says in John 6, verse 32, this one being the ESV, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. There's what your ancestors got, and then there's what is the true bread of heaven, right? Why is it daily bread? Why is it a prayer for daily bread, right? And not only did they gather it day by day, okay, but also in Exodus 16:21, it says they gathered it morning by morning, everyone as much as he would eat. You can only take as much as you could handle. You can only take as much as you can handle in a day. You can only take a day's portion for your tent, for your household. And here's what Jesus says about this other bread from heaven, right? For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world, right? You're not going to need it repeatedly over and over again. You're not going to need it day by day to sustain you. And so here it is in a New Testament covenant sense that God is giving us bread and giving us bread to sustain us. And then there's another form of bread that he's giving to save us. He's giving us other bread to save us. And that bread to save us is bread that is making it to where we are now, right? We are now being provided sustained everlasting life with the security of salvation through Jesus Christ. That's a big difference. That's a big difference. And manna doesn't pass the true bread test, right? Manna, it doesn't pass the true bread test. And when I say the true bread test, right, we're talking about, I shared this in a blog post some time ago, right? And the true bread test breaks down what is really temporary, right? And what is ongoing, what is something that can be sustained by God, something that God can show us and share with us as everlasting. There's what is simply satisfactory and that can sustain us. And then there is what is everlasting that will keep us going forever. And there's a big difference in these two, the bread of life and this manna, which is temporary, and the bread of life, which is everlasting. That's the big difference right there. That's where the key is in this. And I shared this same true bread test concept in, like I said, a blog post. That blog post is here. And it was 2011. And imagine that. The word still holds strong. So it really gets into a brief comparison of both the manna and the true bread from heaven, but it shares it in a different light than just what we're doing here on this table. And I want you to see this table as more of a visual to help out with that. So let's think about this. Jesus says in John 6:49, your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, yet they died. He goes on to reiterate that in John 6:51, where he says, your ancestors ate manna and died, but whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. Whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. And so go to Jesus saying, give us day by day our daily bread. Which bread is he really talking about for them to pray about? Our prayer should be for living off of this bread forever and being sustained by this true bread from heaven and feeding on it and living off it and staying in it forever. Trust it. This is what this prayer is talking about. This is what this prayer is dealing with, and us getting from being attached to the Old Testament and coming into the newness of the New Testament and what covenant that would have for us with God. Hey, look, I hope this has been some help. I hope this has been good to you. God be with you. Godspeed. God bless.